Hi, I'm Ro Randall. I'm a psychotherapist, and this is one of a series of videos about how we're coping emotionally with the climate crisis. And in this one, I want to talk about hope and despair, because over the last months, I feel like I've been meeting two different camps of people with utterly opposing views about how we cope with the climate crisis. And on the one hand, there are people who tell me urgently that we have to give people hope. We have to have a narrative of hope and tell stories of how we're going to cope with this. And what characterises the people who tell me these stories emotionally is this sense of being on the edge of something absolutely devastating and frightening. There's a terrible urgency in the way they tell the stories, as if just beneath the surface is a terrifying level of despair. In the other camp, however, are people who are fascinated by apocalyptic scenarios and believe that we should be preparing people for disaster. Their version of telling the truth is a truth in which there is starvation and death and disaster. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are galloping towards us over the horizon. It's a truly terrifying vision of flood and destruction and drought and every awful thing that you can imagine. And they believe that it's our responsibility to speak of this to people because they believe this is what we're going to face. And in these stories, I hear a kind of emotional tone, which is one of a strange kind of quiet satisfaction. And so, on the one hand, we have people who are talking of hope, but emotionally expressing despair. And on the other hand, people who are speaking of disaster, but who are expressing a kind of weird satisfaction. This is a puzzle. And I think that what is happening here is that the people who are expressing hope have somehow not managed to deal with the terror that they're feeling, while the people who are expressing these feelings about disaster are, in a way, those who have found a kind of control. The certainty of the apocalyptic scenario gives people a sense of control, and so they feel able to talk about it. One of the things which I think is very difficult about both of these scenarios is that they actually turn us away from realistic political action. But more importantly, for me as a psychotherapist, what I was reminded of in hearing these stories was a situation that often arises at the start of psychotherapy. When I meet somebody for the first time, at the end of the first session, they will often have told me all sorts of very upsetting and revealing things about themselves and about their families and about their lives. They'll be telling me things which have been very difficult for them to articulate, things which is very hard to say to a stranger. And sometimes at the end, they'll turn to me and they'll say, "Do you think there's any hope then?" Or they'll say, "Well, I'm obviously a hopeless case. I can tell by your face I'm a hopeless case." And in a sense, they're expressing these same two framings. Is there hope? Is there despair? And of course, in psychotherapy, if I say, "Oh yes, I'm sure you're going to get much better," I've created a hostage to fortune because I can't tell the future. If I say the opposite, no, I think you're right, you're a hopeless case, well, they're never going to come back to see me and I have really been no help. I have trampled destructively on all of their dreams and hopes. And the answer is, in a way, that this question is the wrong question. Should we be offering people a narrative of hope? Should we be offering them a narrative of despair? It's the wrong question. So what I do in the consulting room is I will usually say something like, well, I think the answer is that we've got some work to do, and I'm prepared to do that work with you, and I would like to set out on that journey with you, if you're prepared to set out on it with me. And I think the answer in relation to the climate crisis is the same. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but what we do know is that there's work to do. and that we need to find our place in that work, and we need to set out on the journey.